Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Wishing you all a great day. Today we are going to uncover a heartbreaking truth. What will the powerful CEO James do when he finally discovers that the woman he loves is secretly carrying his child and suffering through it all alone? But before we get to this emotional breaking point, please take a quick second to leave a comment and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I truly appreciate all your love and support. And now, let's hold our breath and dive right into today's episode. Thick darkness filled the cramped, rented room, occasionally torn apart by pale flashes of lightning from an approaching storm offshore. Diep slumped over the plastic bucket in the corner. Another wave of nausea surged, constricting her throat. She dry-heaved, squeezing out whatever little sour stomach acid was left until her chest burned. All day today, aside from a few sips of water and half a bowl of bland, watery porridge, she couldn't keep anything down. Her frail body shivered violently, a layer of cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. Slowly, gripping the moss-spotted plaster wall for support, she dragged her exhausted body back to the bamboo bed, drained, completely spent. The morning sickness in her first trimester had hit her so much harder than she had ever imagined. She curled up under the thin blanket, her hands unconsciously rubbing her lower stomach. The tiny life was growing day by day, but the mother carrying it was withering away from exhaustion and deprivation. The ocean wind whistled through the window cracks, sounding like a mournful wail. Never before had Diep felt so alone, so adrift, and so terrified. Her gaze slowly shifted to the old black and white phone lying silently on her pillow. Diep bit her lower lip until it bled. Her trembling hand reached out and picked up the phone. The screen lit up in the pitch black, casting a faint glow on her pale face. Tears flowed uncontrollably, rolling hot down her cheeks. She couldn't carry this alone anymore. She could endure any torture, but if she collapsed, the baby inside her wouldn't survive either. Her thumb hesitated, then pressed the call button for her mother. The ringing tone, beep, beep, echoed steadily, dryly. With every ring, Diep's heart skipped a beat. "Hello." From the other end of the line, her mother's sleepy, raspy, and deeply worn voice spoke up. "Diep, why are you calling so late? Is something wrong, sweetie?" Just that one familiar, caring question was all it took. Every ounce of resilience, every defensive wall Diep had tried to hold up these past few months completely crumbled. She opened her mouth, trying to hold back her sobs, but the broken, choked cries escaped anyway. "Mom," Diep whispered, pressing the phone tight against her ear as if searching for an anchor. "Mom." Hearing her daughter sobbing in the middle of the night, the mother on the other end jolted awake. The rustling of bedsheets echoed urgently, and her voice turned panicked and rushed. "Oh my God, why are you crying so hard you can't even breathe? Tell me what happened. Stop crying, honey. Mom's here. Tell me what's wrong." Diep clutched her chest, gasping for air. She took a deep breath, gathering every last ounce of her courage. The words came out with difficulty but clear. "Mom, I'm pregnant. I'm over 2 months pregnant." The other end of the line suddenly fell into a terrifying, dead silence. The only sound was the mother's choked, heavy breathing coming through the crackling speaker. Then, the mother's muffled cries broke through. It was the gut-wrenching cry of a woman who had given birth, breaking her heart for her daughter who was now forced to endure a lonely pregnancy in a strange, unforgiving place. "I had no other choice, Mom." Diep squeezed her eyes shut, continuing between sobs. "James's family would never accept me. If they knew this baby existed, they would use it to blackmail him. I'd rather give birth on my own, no matter how hard it gets, than let them know." Diep's mother hurriedly wiped her tears. A mother's protective instinct instantly crushed any weakness. "Stop crying, it's not good for the baby. No more hiding or suffering alone. Give me your address. I'm taking the earliest bus tomorrow to come down there. I'll take care of you until the baby is born safe and sound. How could you possibly survive this on your own?" Her mother's firm, warm words felt like an invisible embrace, soothing the freezing loneliness that had been eating away at Diep's mind. Early the next morning, while the thick fog still clung to the pine trees, Diep's mother was already busy in the tiny kitchen. She hurriedly shoved a few sets of old clothes into a worn canvas bag. The clattering woke Thao. She rubbed her eyes and stepped out, looking confusedly at her mother, who was fully dressed and packing. "Where are you going so early?" Thao asked through a long yawn. Her mother stopped, pulled Thao close, and with a dead serious expression, whispered, "Thao, listen to me. Your sister Diep is having terrible morning sickness, and I have to go down there and take care of her right now. You stay here, take care of your own meals, and watch the house." Thao's eyes went wide, her sleepiness vanishing completely. "Diep is having a baby? Wait, does James know?" "Shh." Her mother frowned, pressing an index finger to her lips. "Absolutely do not let James know, you hear me? Your sister has her reasons for hiding this. If he comes by this weekend, just tell him I went to visit a sick, distant relative and will be gone for a few months. Even if your life depends on it, you do not breathe a word about Diep. Got it?" Thao swallowed hard. Seeing her mother's intense demeanor, she obediently nodded. Just 10 minutes later, the frail, unsteady figure of her mother disappeared around the bend of the dirt road, heading straight for the town's bus station. A few days later, on a rare sunny weekend morning, the sleek black SUV slowly rolled down the gravel road, pulling into the front yard of the familiar, simple house. The quiet engine shut off, returning the strange stillness to the small neighborhood. James stepped out. Today, he wasn't wearing the expensive, flashy suits of a ruthless CEO. He wore a dark polo shirt and comfortable khakis, his sleeves rolled up to reveal his toned forearms. Ever since Diep left, his life seemed to swing between only two extremes: working like a madman and spending his weekends quietly driving back to this desolate countryside. James looked up at the gentle hill behind the house. Up there, dozens of workers were busy tilling the soil, preparing to plant young seedlings. It wasn't a profitable corporate project. It was a private haven he meticulously cared for, purely to cover it in the green of tea leaves. He did it because her name was Diep, meaning leaf. He wanted to build a lush green hill with his own hands, turning this place into a sanctuary of absolute safety and peace, silently waiting for the day his tea leaf would return. James walked around to the trunk and grabbed 2 large bags filled with nut milk and supplements. He pushed open the bamboo gate and stepped into the yard. "Auntie, I'm here!" James called out with his deep, warm voice. Normally, the moment she heard his car engine in the alley, Diep's mother would rush out to greet him, playfully scolding him for the long drive, before bustling around to cook him a hot, home-cooked meal. But today, his greeting was met with dead silence. The red brick courtyard was covered in unswept, dry bamboo leaves. The kitchen was cold, without even a wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. James frowned, carrying the bags toward the kitchen. Inside, Thao was clumsily using a spatula to stir-fry a plate of dull-looking water spinach, wincing as the wood smoke stung her eyes. "Thao," James spoke up, startling the girl so badly she dropped the aluminum pot lid onto the cement floor with a loud clatter. "Where did your mom go? She's usually home on the weekends." Thao spun around. Seeing James's calm face and deep, piercing eyes, She instantly panicked. She hurriedly wiped her hands on her pants, looking down at her toes to avoid his gaze. "Oh, you just got here, James," Thao stammered, gulping. My mom isn't home." "Where did she go?" James asked calmly, setting the bags on the table. "Well," Thao blurted out, accidentally raising her voice, which scared even herself. "She went away to visit a sick, distant relative. She said she'll be gone for a few months." The air in the cramped kitchen suddenly froze. James slowly looked up, scanning Thao's face. Who was he? He was a man who had survived the most brutal negotiations, an expert at reading the minds of the most cunning corporate sharks. How could a little fear, confusion, tightly clasped hands, and the rapid blinking of this young girl fool him? James frowned slightly. Nothing about this made sense. Her mother was a chronic worrier. She would never suddenly abandon her daughter to fend for herself for months just to visit some random, distant relative. Furthermore, why did she leave in such a rush without even calling to tell him? Leaving so abruptly without saying a word to him proved she was deliberately hiding a secret much bigger than that. James's silence made the pressure in the kitchen feel as heavy as a boulder. He wasn't angry. He just stepped slowly closer, standing right in front of Thao. His eyes were sharp and dead quiet, piercing straight through the girl's attempts to hide. A bad premonition, sharp as a knife, suddenly slashed through his mind. "Thao." James's voice dropped, incredibly soft, yet carrying the crushing weight of a hidden truth. "You're lying." His quiet words hit Thao's mind like a hammer. She jumped, gripping her grease-stained shirt, stepping back until her back hit the edge of the brick stove. I'm not," Thao stammered, her chest heaving. "My mom, she really did go visit a relative." James didn't take another step. He stood perfectly still in the cramped, smoke-smelling kitchen. His dark eyes drilled into Thao's panic. The tension was like a snapping wire. All the calm, cold composure he had worn since stepping out of the car suddenly shattered. James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, the powerful corporate CEO was gone. All that remained was an exhausted, broken man, torn apart by a yearning that clawed at him every single day. "Thao, I'm begging you." His voice suddenly cracked, hoarse and trembling. He lowered his voice, pleading, shedding every last ounce of his pride. "Did something happen to Diep? Look at me. I've been living a nightmare, not knowing where she is or if she's even okay. If your mom really went to find Diep, please, have mercy on me. Tell me the truth." Thao looked up. The moment she met the bloodshot eyes of the man standing before her, filled with absolute despair and sincerity, the last wall of defense in the girl's heart collapsed. She remembered her mother's order to keep the secret at all costs, but seeing his unbearable pain, Thao couldn't do it. Her sister had suffered too much already, and this man loved her so much he stripped away his own dignity to beg her. Why did they have to keep torturing each other? Tears welled up in Thao's eyes. She broke down, sobbing, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "James, Diep is pregnant." The kitchen froze completely. Even the crackling of the firewood seemed to die out. James stood paralyzed. His heart skipped a beat, then immediately pounded wildly, threatening to break his ribs. His pupils dilated. His breathing stopped entirely. What did you just say?" His voice was weightless, drifting into the air like a sleepwalker's. Thao kept sobbing, spilling out all the repressed secrets. "She's pregnant with your baby. She called crying to my mom, saying the morning sickness was awful. She'd throw up everything she ate, and she was getting so thin. My mom was so worried that she caught a bus a few days ago to a fishing village down south to take care of her. She told me to absolutely never let you know. Every word Thou said slammed into James's brain. A deafening ring echoed in his head. His ears went numb. Pregnant. She was carrying his child. The hands hanging by his sides began to shake. He knew exactly why Diep had quietly left. She walked away to protect him from his father's cruel threats to ensure his career path remained unobstructed. But she found out she was pregnant while on the run. It felt like someone had crushed James's heart. A fragile woman carrying his flesh and blood, suffering through morning sickness in some dark, unfamiliar place. In her weakest, most terrifying moment, she should have called him for protection. But no. She chose to call her mother. She chose to bite the bullet, enduring the poverty and the violently exhausting nausea, absolutely refusing to share that vulnerability with him because she was afraid. She knew his father's ruthlessness. She was terrified that if he knew about this baby, he would use the child's life to blackmail James, clipping his wings and forcing him to abandon the woman he loved for an arranged marriage. Diep's sacrifice, her love, was so immense that she was willing to be cruel to herself and her unborn child, accepting the label of a heartless runaway just to pave a smooth, rose-lined career path for him. James's throat tightened bitterly. A massive lump blocked his airway. He stumbled back a step, burying his face in his hands. The broad, solid shoulders that always carried a massive corporate empire now shook violently. Hot, salty tears spilled from the proud man's bloodshot eyes, splashing onto the cold cement floor. For the first time in his life, he cried. He cried from the overwhelming joy of knowing he was going to be a father, and he cried from the agonizing heartbreak of imagining the woman he loved most struggling in a strange, unforgiving place. Oh God. James let out a guttural, agonizing groan like a wounded animal, his hands clenched into fists so tight his veins bulged. Diep, why did you suffer through this all alone? He snapped his head up. The despair was gone from his eyes, replaced by a fierce, wild, blazing fire. Thou, where is that fishing village? Tell me. James stepped forward, his voice urgent. Thou whimpered, shaking her head through her tears. I don't know the exact address. Mom left in such a hurry. She only told me she was taking the bus to the fishing port in the Southern Coastal District. The fishing port in the Southern Coastal District. That was more than enough. Even if he had to overturn every single brick and ask down every alley of that port, he was going to find her. No one could stop him now. I'm leaving. Without a long goodbye, James spun on his heel, taking long, rushed strides out to the brick courtyard. He left all the bags of medicine sitting abandoned on the wooden table. Just then, the sky outside suddenly darkened. Pitch-black clouds rolled in from the sea, blocking out the rare sunlight. The wind began to blow in violent gusts, sending dry bamboo leaves swirling wildly. A massive storm was making landfall. James yanked the car door open and threw himself into the driver's seat. The SUV's engine roared to life with a deafening growl, tearing through the quiet village air. He slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The sleek black car shot out of the alley, kicking up a cloud of dust, leaving behind the heavy drops of the beginning rain. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His eyes stared dead ahead, piercing through the sheet of white rain whipping relentlessly against the windshield. Wait for me, Diep. Just hold on a little longer. Please wait for me. The car launched forward like an arrow piercing the wind, heading straight south. to where a woman was holding her pregnant belly, enduring the storm, and to where a tiny life was waiting for its father's embrace. Honestly, guys, reading the scene where James buries his face in his hands and cries in that poor kitchen literally gave me goosebumps. A man who breathes fire in the boardroom, who holds an entire empire in his hands, completely breaking down in sheer agony because his woman would rather suffer than share her vulnerability with him. The image of his car tearing through the white rain at the end of the episode was just so incredibly powerful. With only a tiny bit of information about a southern fishing port, do you guys think James can turn the place upside down to find Diep and their baby? And when he finally sees her, what do you think will be the very first thing he says? Pour all your feelings and predictions into the comments below. I read them all and will give them a heart. If today's episode brought a tear to your eye, please don't hesitate to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to give me the motivation to keep bringing you the next videos. Thank you so much for always being here with me. Have a truly peaceful day, and I will catch you in the next episode.